record.
And
And
Lizzie with her picture.
hello, everyone, again, and welcome to Project E3 Leadership Academy Communities of Practice. We're excited to have you participate. I am going to mute everyone, and you are welcome to unmute yourselves if you have a question or something you want to answer or ask during the course of the presentation. Give me one more second. Okay. So as we normally do, we'll ask that you introduce yourselves, and you should have the ability to unmute yourselves again. So we'll start by going by state. So we'll start with the first one, which is California. Is anyone from California on the call today?
Good morning, this is Cynthia Herrera from California.
Hi,
Department of Hello, Department of Rehabilitation.
Good to have you.
Hello, everybody. This is Ismael de Leon from California, Department of Rehabilitation Counselor, Student Services Counselor as well.
Hello. Thanks for being on. You said you have a guest with you?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. Anyone else from California? All right, we'll go over to Illinois.
Hi, I'm Pamela Gaddis, Division of Rehab, State of Illinois.
Hi, Pam.
Hi.
Good to have you. Anyone else? All right, next is Kentucky. Not hearing any. We'll go over to Louisiana.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Malian. I work for Louisiana Rehab Services.
All right, great. Thanks for being on today and welcome.
Thank you.
Anyone else from Louisiana?
Yes, absolutely. Gregory Howell. I am with the New Orleans Regional AIDS Planning Council. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being on today.
My pleasure.
We are doing introductions, and we're at the state of Louisiana. Anyone else want to introduce themselves from Louisiana?
Hi, this is Donna DeLuca.
Hi,
I'm in rehab with LRS in Baton Rouge.
welcome.
Thank you.
This is Katie LeBlanc, and I am with Uplifted in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Awesome. Thank you for being on.
Joyce Cooper with Louisiana Rehab Services, Slidell, Louisiana.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi.
Hi, Amy Nelson. I'm with LRS.
Welcome.
Velma Johnson, Louisiana Rehabilitation Services, New Orleans region.
Hi, Velma. All right, gonna go up to Montana. Do we have anyone from Montana on today? What about New Hampshire? New Jersey?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Fiore with Jesby House in New Jersey.
Hi, Lisa. New Mexico? All right, we'll go over to North Carolina.
Hello, this is Beth Newcomb with Vocational Rehabilitation in Rocky Mount, North Carolina.
Hi, Beth. Anyone else? What about Oregon?
This is Jane Hagel with the Oregon Commission for the Blind.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Robin.
All right, South Carolina is next. Okay, Virginia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is LaPearl Smith, and I'm one of the business development managers with the Virginia Division for Rehabilitative Services. David Leon, who's our Deputy Director for Workforce Development, sends his regards and regrets. He had another meeting that was falling at the same time that he had to be at. So I am representing DARS along with my colleague Martin, who will introduce himself. Good to see everybody that's on this call.
Good to have you, LaPearl. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, LaPearl. This is Martin Kurielowski. I'm the Transition and Education Services Coordinator for Virginia Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, the state VR agency for Virginia.
Welcome, Martin. Thanks for being on today. Anyone that I missed in the introductions that want to introduce themselves at this time? I know we have Peggy Hale on from UA Current. Hi, Peggy.
Hello, everybody. I'm here. I'm just not showing myself today. I'm on leave this week and I haven't combed my hair today. But hi.
Hi, Peggy.
Thanks for being on, Peggy. Anyone else that I missed? All right, great. Thanks for being with us today and being a part of our Project E3 monthly meeting. This month, we're focusing on self-employment. So we're excited to have you join in this discussion with our guest presenter, Mr. Philip Adams, who is the CEO of Forge and the former project director, I believe is the correct title, of Arkansas Promise, which was a model demonstration project at the University of Arkansas, providing services, support, empowerment to youth with disability, transition age youth with disabilities and their families. Philip's going to be talking with us about self-employment, so we're going to turn it over to him. And please, if you have any questions or put it in the chat. Before I turn over to you, Philip, I do want to ask people, if I don't have your email address, if you're new to the community of practice, if you don't mind putting that in the chat so I can document that and email you about future meetings, that would be very helpful. Thank you, Philip, for being with us today.
Hey, you're welcome, Robin. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about this topic specifically. It certainly is an intersectional topic with the populations that we're serving, and Promise was such. And the work I do now at Forge is similar in nature. Both those who are in an underserved demographic, but also, or because of that first status, they lack access to finance. And so we've been doing that for about 33 years in Arkansas. Of course, I have not been doing that 33 years, but the mission itself is in line for me. So what I've done today is post some questions, and Robin forwarded me a couple resources to help inform this conversation. And I do want to reiterate that definition of this couple hours together is a conversation. I want you to feel free to jump in on the mic. I have no problem being interrupted, or type your chat, and Robin's going to help me call those out as they come up. But I did get to review California's previous presentation to the group about how they provide self-employment services, which was rich with context for me, as well as the comments that the group has submitted about self-employment, what topics and issues they really wanted to cover or dig deeper into. And so I've tried to give us some prompts to do that today, and I hope it's helpful. It's certainly been a continuation and a nice through thread for me, moving from one career to the other. Whoa. So what does, let's see if I can get this to move forward. There we go. As I said, Forge is a not-for-profit community loan fund. So we're a mission-based lender. We fit in a couple groups, and a couple of those groups I think are very relevant to the work that needs to be done throughout VR as a system with the resource partners that are available. And some of those are public entities, some of those are private companies, and some of them, like Forge, while a private company, really do rely heavily on public support. And we do a variety of lending types, and that's our primary goal. We do two things. We do technical assistance and lending. When you look at the hours we spend and you look at our budget, we are primarily a technical assistance provider. And so in our world, technical assistance is meeting people where they are and getting them ready for a loan, whether it's from us or from someone else. And then after we make them a loan, supporting them to be successful throughout the entire process. It's sort of touch points and personalization that many do not experience at a traditional financial institution. We loan to people in both rural and urban centers. And some of those rural centers in Arkansas, I mean, for all but 3 cities in Arkansas, you're in a rural area, but others are more in that very rural or extremely isolated rural setting. And a lot of the data we've got on self-employment through VR says the more rural the setting, the more likely the success of closures for self-employment. And so that's applicable. There's just not as many other options available, in fact. I put some data in for y'all just on sort of who we serve. One thing about coming from Promise to somewhere like Forge, we don't collect disability information from applicants. I do expect, and looking at the numbers of self-employed individuals in the typical population who identify with a disability, that we've got a number of people who would identify that way, but it's not information we collect at the moment. As a CDFI, this acronyms is a community development financial institution. This is a certification through the US Treasury, and we hold that certification as a mission-based lender. And that is sort of one common feature of all CDFIs as a mission-based lenders. They offer specific awards every year to CDFIs to provide financial products, financial services, and development services, which we would call technical assistance, to people with disabilities. It's a targeted population within the US Treasury that they want to distribute funds more equitably in the future. And I've got a consortium at the end of the presentation for everybody to share, because I think they would be a great resource to reach out to and partner locally for those that are operating those funds. There we go. So I think the first issue about self-employment is its loftiness, its fanciness, its otherness. And this is not an issue specific to people with disabilities. I believe this is an issue specific to, I think, everyone. There is a certain level for a lot of people of fear, misunderstanding, sort of a heightened view of it. And part of that, I believe, is like the success stories that we hold up about entrepreneurship or self-employment. The word entrepreneur tends to be this group, right? In our heads, usually. It's like, who made the billions and gazillions of dollars, whether they had it beforehand or came from nothing and made those gazillions of dollars? Those are entrepreneurs. They built an empire. They employ thousands of people. But it's the same, right? The entrepreneurs, the bulk of those who are entrepreneurs are not in this group at all. They may have an employee, they may not have an employee. It's a mom and pop operation. It's a two best friend operation. It's somebody operating from their living room and loving it operation. And so that's one thing I hope contextually is, how do we approach it with less fear? What work do we need to do systemically, individually, and through partnerships to really break down some of those initial barriers of accessibility and approachability? And that's both from the client side and from the practitioner side. How can we make it more approachable? How can we make it more accessible? What are the secrets of entrepreneurship that we don't have? And my quick answer to that question is that there are none. There are none. There are no secrets there. You try things and they work, and if they don't work, you try something else and you learn from what happened. I mean, and that's true of supported employment, unsupported employment, and everybody's experience, I think, in the professional world. I got a little lag in moving things through, but I'm trying to figure it out. There we go. I do like the term self-employment, and I wish more people outside of VR would use that as an appropriate word for people looking to open a business, start a business, have a sole proprietorship, form a partnership, whatever their goals, that we can really work to level and make it more accessible. And I think that terminology is fantastic to start. When we look at it from a VR perspective, whether as a qualified rehab professional or from a client perspective, I do want to ask the group to think about what your initial gut reactions are when you think about self-employment, right? That's our setting. That's the word we use for that setting. What does it bring up for you? Versus thinking about a supported employment or a competitive integrated employment. Click, click. So with that in mind, like from the group, if anybody is feeling like sharing, feeling brave, what do you think about when you think about self-employment? Like, and I mean like either visceral or practical words, feelings, emotions, experiences. What comes up for you when you think about it?
This is Jane from Oregon, and I think about the empowerment of a person to operate under their own steam and not be subject to as much discrimination, to get a reward for their own motivation and input and energy.
Thank you, Jane. That's exceptional feedback. I appreciate that. And what could be like more in line with our goals for vocational rehabilitation? I mean, that's where I see like the potential in self-employment feels like it has a multi-finality of that empowering, I think, self-fulfilling nature, right? Like as we're able to accomplish these things in terms of independent living and our outside of work activities, this seems to be most in line with reinforcing those above other settings. And so I thank you. Thank you.
Philip, this is Peggy. What comes to my mind, of course, I haven't been a counselor in a long time, but what came to my mind when I was a counselor was you have to have so many resources available to you to begin self-employment. And it sounds like you might have some answers for that. But back when I was a counselor, it was hard to find the resources to help someone get what they needed in order to go into self-employment.
Thank you, Peggy. I think that's an excellent point. And it touches on a couple issues for me. One is real hard concrete resources. And I say hard concrete like the imaginary things like money, the things we made up and rely on for, you know, power and sustenance. But also those things like capacity building, right? Both for counselors, as you said, Peggy, as a frontline staff, knowing what those resources are and how to access them, but also for the client in their capacity to run their own business. Certainly, I think as I read through California's, the assessment model, they've applied that traditional VR assessment model to the self-employment setting in a really good way. But do we have the resources in our staff, in our systems to really evaluate if somebody should be self-employed? And I think that's part of that demystification, right, Peggy? When you say there aren't resources,
right?
If I've always eaten, if I've always eaten meat and I'm hungry and there's no meat, but I'm surrounded by berries and cabbage, I've got plenty of resources that I need to survive. I don't know about them. And so if I did know about them, I would have what I need right at my hand.
Martin is bringing up another area. He says our staff counselors are generally not comfortable or skilled to support folks with self-employment. So they're likely to drive services away from self-employment options. And Martin, I found myself trying to sidestep helping people go into self-employment because of stuff like that, because I wasn't comfortable knowing that I could get them to success. I could be the support they needed to get them to a successful closure. Would you like to speak more on that? I'll let you have it.
Well, this is La Pearl, also with Virginia DARS. For a number of years, we had a self-employment coordinator with our agency. When our agency did some restructuring a couple of years ago, and that position was no longer with us. But one of the things that he would do, of course, meant sit down and kind of find out, of course, why this person was interested in self-employment, but also looking at, their helping them develop a business plan and the resources that they had to put into it. And that's where the challenge was, because a lot of times people think, well, I'm just going to go start my own business or something and just start working for myself, and not thinking about all of the effort and planning and things that go into making that happening and making that happen. Even looking into all of the tax liabilities that go with that. So it ended up being that sometimes that people would start with that, and then between the client and the counselor and all that, they just decided it just wasn't worth all of the time and investment. It took more time and investment than people wanted to give. For those that were successful, they ended up being very successful under his guidance, but more often than not, people just decide to go a different route after all was said and done.
That's great. Thanks, Pearl. One thing you said that prompts me is, like, in VR, we don't have an employment coordinator, right? Everybody's an employment coordinator in some sense, but we have a specialized self-employment coordinator. And that speaks to sort of the general training, right? Like, we want to present this as an option to people, but we're not training people academically and professionally to have it as an actual color on their palette, right? To help paint this individualized portrait. We say it's an option, but if that how to support someone in a business plan for self-employment was focused on as part of this sort of idea of developing an individualized plan for employment, right? Or an individualized employment plan, we may be in a different spot, right? And this is part of that option. When we look at what can be done, I think existing staff and services, the training opportunities, the educational opportunities, the experience, back to both La Pearl and Peggy's points and Martin's in there, is to say, I'm confident because I have the experience. I have the client knowledge of John and Susan and Larry that I helped before to get successful closures in supported employment. I do not have that successful experience getting somebody self-employed. I don't have that to draw on. And I think that's a big part, right? Like, if Oprah and Elon Musk are what we hold up as our self-employment stories, right? Or if that's our first line, that's going to really intimidate everybody. But if we have more stories, if we have a library of success and what this looks like, both to educate clients about what's out there and the frontline staff to say, oh, that's what it looks like. We've got VR counselors talking about how they went through this process, what worked and what didn't. And I think it's important in those to both highlight success stories and also unsuccessful stories, right? To say, here's where we ended up successfully, but we tried self-employment first. Because those can be just as, I think, confidence building, right? I think when we look at that, that's good.
I had one other comment from Pamela Geddes, and she said ideal. I wondered if she wanted to say more about that. Like, are you saying that that's something that we aspire to?
I think it's something that we aspire to, but because of all the issues that everyone's talking about us being prepared to do it, we're not prepared to give or help our customers with that service, but it's an ideal service for them if that's the direction they want to go. And I just feel like there would be a lot more wanting to go in that direction if we were better at guiding it.
I agree with you, Pamela. I think that is what they need, people who can help them and guide them through the process, because it is more laborious than going to work for somebody else, isn't it?
And that's where I think we have opportunities to provide the sort of knowledge and training and partnerships at the right time of the process, Peggy, to make it not feel as laborious. That's my hope. Is that right? Like, we can make those connections between the existing services and the existing support for this same community that's out there to utilize everybody's skills and experience in the best way possible. So where,
right, yes.
When I look through the requirements that California specifically had, the breakdown for the client's role and responsibility in self-employment VR process, the qualified rehab professional's role, and the business consultant's role, the qualified rehab professional is serving the role of a junior loan underwriter in that process, in my opinion, right? Like, that's what a junior underwriter does. And then they pass it up the chain to the senior underwriter who makes the decision. And that's not something that I would not expect any VR professional to have that background coming into it. I mean, even after years on the job, like, being able to evaluate that business plan is a completely different set of academic and professional skills.
Absolutely.
But that's how it's set up. I mean, and that's where I'm talking about, like, the training that we come in for supported employment settings, competitive employment settings. We go over those skills. What do we need to look at? What do we need to assess? What do we need to dig for? How do we need to carve it up? But for a business plan, we don't. And so the way California has it structured, and that may be pulled directly from, federal regulation, or it may be California specific, but they've got the three parties involved in the process. And as a Venn diagram, they do overlap in some ways. Like, it's the client's role to write a business plan, and it's the small business consultant's role to assist them with that. And it's also the qualified rehab professional's role to assist them with that. Right. And then the qualified rehab professional and the small business consultant then both have the charge to assess the business plan and make recommendations on it. But yeah, I think that's the goal for Peggy and Pamela both. To your points, like, if we can relieve what feels like a fearful and laborious lift to get someone engaged in self-employment, would we see more closures in self-employment than we do?
I think so myself. But like I say, I'm an old counselor, been out of the field for a while. What about some of you younger people that are still in the field? They can probably answer that better than I can.
This is Jane from Oregon again. I've done a lot of self-employment plans for people, and I love that avenue and what it offers to the individual client. And in fact, it's more difficult for me to get the agency support. So I sort of say openly, but not fully transparently, to tell what I'm doing. I tell my boss, oh, I'm going to do this, and I wrap it as transportation or whatever, but I work with people who are visually impaired, and I purchased a Mango Elf e-trike off of Craigslist, where the client paid $500 and we paid $4,000 for this mango colored shell e-trike, and he roars all over town in it with his branding on it. And it has, since he started doing that, his receivables have tripled, and now as of March quadrupled. So it's, you have to kind of think outside the box, but there's not a comfort level with that type of thinking from agencies. So I just don't talk as much about what I'm doing. I'm talking about it way more right now. But just to make, help some things happen for branding for that individual. This guy has ridden bikes for 34 years. He's like 42. He's ridden bikes all his life long, and so he's got that deep connection, and he's actually going to add to his business, which is a computer repair business. He's going to start building e-bikes. So it's all part of thinking collaboratively with that person as if you're a member of the business, because we kind of are as counselors when we're helping get it going. We're, consultant, and I mean, we use small business consultants, of course, but it's being able to think outside the box, not scare any agency admin folks too much with with that. I love the option, but I do know that there are barriers with the thinking that's out there about how iffy it can be, and there's truth to that too.
Martin? Thank you, Jane.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, it's probably a combination of many issues. So I think that our counselors, they know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. And so if they haven't seen or witnessed what they consider to be a realistic and relatable success story for self-employment that has occurred through the VR process, then they're going to have a hard time knowing how to recognize those opportunities and support someone to fulfillment of successful self-employment pathway when they're working with them. So that's one thing. People follow the path of least resistance in their professional careers, and if something seems like it's going to be an uphill battle, they're not going to fight too hard to pursue it. So we have to make sure those examples and success stories are out there, and that they are something that they can see themselves doing. But it's also, in education, I don't know how much they're talking about self-employment. I'm involved in transition services for our students and youth, and really self-employment, you can see the folks who are going to benefit from self-employment early. And if you identify that early and you nurture that before they have needs for paying bills and supporting themselves and possibly others, if you can do that in that supportive environment while they're in school with many partners there, and the opportunity to educate them and prepare them for something like that and try those sorts of things out, then when they become adults, then they're going to be able to pursue something like that a lot more successfully. So I think that trying to initiate something only on the back end with adults is going to be a challenge if you're not also figuring out how can we do that upfront work with younger folks, so that it's more of a pathway and a pipeline, and you're not trying to suddenly, jarringly change an entire adult system, but you're creating, pathways for the future working with the students.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. And coming from Promise, where we were working with transition age youth, I think that was our experience and spot on, providing the role models to see what was possible, and for 5 years, supporting them and exposing them to every skill we could to make it successful. Thank you. There's another point in here, Jane, reinforcing yours about, not being scared. If you don't have that agency support, here's that you don't be scared of going to the agency with what you're trying to do. You just have to be able to justify, right? And that's a great point. I am a creative by training. I came from the theater. I got lost and ended up in public service and administration where I am now. But the way we would frame this in the theater is we have creative constraints, and you need creative constraints in order to thrive. And the VR process specifically appeals to my creative nature because we do have some pretty firm creative constraints there, be it a palette of VR services available to us in a manual or a budget. But the goal is, if you have those constraints, think of them as a safety net. Those are a barrier. And within them, you can then thrive. You've got complete freedom within those. You know the barriers, you know the expectations, you know what you need to justify. Be creative in how we get there. And that is a point. I think somebody mentioned a rut, the path of least resistance. I think as I got into VR through Promise, definitely experienced that. Sort of digging through the manual, looking for, we'll call them bureaucratic gymnastics that we could do. And really digging through that manual and looking for those services available, both through pre-employment transition services and then as they transition in the full VR services. And found that the counselors and the students and adults plans were using a very limited array of those services, right? And they were either A, overly consistent, meaning that strikes me as agency and budget driven, right? We know that this square peg goes in the square hole and the round one in the round hole, and we know exactly what that costs. Great. It doesn't really speak to the individualized nature of vocational rehabilitation, but it means we stay on target for our budget. Okay. And also, like, as a counselor, you know, kind of to Peggy and Pamela's points, we know what we're familiar with. We know what works, and we're comfortable there. And not only comfortable, it's not just about comfort. Peggy used an important word. It's about confidence, right? As someone who's invested in this process, as someone who is expending, right, public dollars and time, we want that confidence to provide the best success. And so some of those limited services, those ruts, develop for a reason. And we just have to work to make sure that we can break out of those when needed. And that's not an individual responsibility there, right? I see that both as kind of systemic and agency at the agency level, and also as part of a peer group. I think that's where the biggest sort of changes here can happen is peers both across the front line at VR agencies, but also peer-to-peer from VR agencies to other supporting organizations that are working to support self-employment for people with disabilities. Like who's providing that technical assistance at mission-driven lenders for people with disabilities, and how can we get them connected with frontline staff locally so we can share, learn, and support people more efficiently. Okay, so this stood out for me. So across the entire population, last year, there were about 28.2% of the population was self-employed in the United States. 10.3% of those who were self-employed said they identified as having a disability. But through VR, we historically have hovered around 1 to 2% closure for people with disabilities in self-employment settings. So the organic draw to self-employment for people with disabilities is 10 times more than what we are able to accomplish within the VR system. Which tells me kind of, you know, to Jane's point and Pamela's, it's an ideal setting in a lot of cases, right? In terms of our goals and in terms of client goals for what they want out of life and their needs, it's fantastic. But we've got a lot that's keeping us back from that within VR. And from what I've heard from y'all, both in comments and in California's presentation, and what I've heard from you today, it doesn't strike me as a client-driven problem, right? it definitely strikes me as like, just as with clients saying, what is available? What are the things I can choose between? For us as practitioners, like, what are the options that are really available to me? Like, yes, Robin, you mentioned an in-person meeting. Yeah, our October meeting may be in Hawaii. That's an option. Is it though? Is it really an option? Do we actually have what we need to go to Hawaii? No, we don't. But if that changes, please let me know. I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, so this has been mentioned a couple times, and I would love for a couple people to chime in here. We mentioned that it's more time intensive, takes more labor to get a self-employment sort of engagement on the front end. Does anyone see it? Is it actually more expensive? And is it actually riskier? And I mean that both from a perspective of a client's sort of success in work and other things, but also from the agency side. Is it deemed as riskier? Jane, you mentioned that fear or lack of support from the agency. Is it because it's more expensive, more intensive, riskier? How is it viewed in that regard with those keywords?
Well, this is La Pearl again. I'm sorry. I've got to get back to make sure I raise my hand on Zoom. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I'm used to doing meetings in person where you raise your hand to get people's attention. Well, I think if I recall statistically, there are a large percentage in the United States of first-time, self-employment or business enterprises failing for any number of reasons, whether it's just lack of resources, lack of marketing, whatever the case, might be. So I think from that standpoint, if that is in fact true, if statistics are true there, I mean, it makes it, riskier all the way around, whether you're a person with a disability or not. But that being said, it certainly becomes a little, perhaps maybe a little riskier for a person with a disability because there are other variables there. Again, not impossible for those that are able to have the right connections and the right resources to make it happen. I just think, I'm thinking of a young man we're working with in our Fredericksburg office who was able to become successful with having his own barbershop in a very rural part of what we call the Northern Neck there on the Potomac River. That, the self-employment counselor that we had worked with him to help him establish. Now, he came with that skill that he learned from his father, and kind of got a little experience working in a barbershop that was established, but developed enough clientele that he was able to open up his own barbershop and become very successful at that. But there were a lot of, key, factors there that went into making that successful, for him. Yeah. So I think it just really depends upon, what everybody's bringing to the table, and whether it's, something that is successful or not.
I think you made a couple great points, La Pearl. One I want to address is the failure rate for small businesses. So we don't have, because small businesses open in so many different ways through so many different support systems, whether that means I funded a business on my credit card and open for business, or I access some sort of state or federal program to do so. We don't have good data like 9/11 data on small business success and failure. We've got some general data nationally on employment, and the regular data from the Department of Labor does include some self-employment, but it's all extracted and sort of estimated. So I have always leaned, and especially since coming to Forge in the position I have now, I've leaned on that general sort of anecdotal data as though I do it's on par for me with 50% of all marriages fail. I actually have no idea if that's true or not. And I think it was true in 72 when it first was published, and where are we now? Is it the same? Is it more? Is it less? I don't know, but that's kind of where I put it. And the second part, because this is a big fear factor with anybody coming to open a small business, is that data's in our head. That statistic is one of those that just got ingrained in our heads. And I try and remind people that, especially as the workforce demographics change in terms of age, the average job, not self-employment, but the average job is only held for about 2 years, right? And so when we look at small businesses opening and closing, we seem to frame it in terms of success and failure. But if somebody leaves a job in 2 years, that's normal now. And it's not a success or failure. They're just making a change, and it happens all the time. So I do want to keep that in mind, that like is in fact a self-employment, if we get closure in 12 months and the business isn't open 12 months later, how do we frame that? How do we think about that in our head? Especially from an agency perspective, viewing it as like riskier or more intensive, like, is it though? Is it though? Because the experience, that's another point I want everybody to think about. The experience of self-employment outside of VR, just the experience of self-employment generally, a lot of these successful small business owners or self-proprietors are on their third or fourth business. And how does that compare with people exploring their career opportunities in the private sector or public sector to find one that fits and they're there a while longer? And how does that compare with sort of initial closures for supported employment and then any subsequent services accessed at VR? Do those people come back when that one doesn't work out, right? I will tell you all, Promise, I worked for Promise for 6 years. Prior to that, my longest employment was 18 months. Going back to when I was 14 years old through 34 years old. My longest employment was 18 months. And I don't consider all those jobs failures. Like the administrative assistant at a landscape company, that was a bad fit. I'll be honest, that was a bad fit for everybody. But everything else, right? It was another job on the way to where I am now. So thank you, LaPearl.
Had some other comments in the chat from Pamela. Because we do not see self-employment fulfilled often enough, it would be nice to see self-employment success stories from across the states and shared from the counselor and the customer. So that kind of speaks to what you're talking about, those success stories, success rates. And then Jane responded that Oregon has a couple of those success stories on the Project E3 website, also on YouTube. She's also given a link there about the person who has his bike shop and another client with a recording studio.
Excellent. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Pamela.
Robin, I would like to tell the group something about Urban Myers. Have y'all heard him present on self-employment? He is a success story within himself, and he does some, well, he's written several books, and he used to present a class for us on self-employment, but he is really good. And as far as success stories, his story would be a great story to add to. Looks like we've got a bunch going on here. I see people talking about them posted, but what do you think about that? Would you like to hear from him sometime?
Are you asking if we want to have him speak to the group?
Yes, I was asking the group if they would want to hear from him.
I'm for it. Is he a football coach, or is that a different?
No, he sells yachts in California, and he's blind.
Oh,
writes books.
Cool. Sounds awesome.
He is awesome. I've met him. Very awesome. And I think what we're talking about today, what he would have to say would fit in beautifully. Maybe we could ask him to join us next time. If you want to hear from him, let me know.
Yeah, I think more of those, I know this particular community is focused around serving specialized populations, right? Specific targeted populations, intersectional populations with disability. Those that I know outside of VR, the CDFI, the US Treasury did operate recently a program to build capacity among their organizations. That is the mission-driven lenders and providers of technical assistance, to build capacity for developing self-employment as an option. I think that's a fantastic opportunity there to really gather, collect, and even produce some of those stories, to really get them out there, get them in one place, and have that resource library built. Think of it like, I always leaned heavily on ICANN, looking for accommodations, like ideas, right? A creative inspiration site. Same idea, right? Like as self-employment, maybe it's the type of self-employment that sparks something for you and a client. Perhaps it's some comment that the counselor said about how they were able to work with their agency partners, or how they were able to work with this outside group. Whatever it may be, just having that available. Right now, it's like, it feels like we've got, again, right, we're surrounded by fruits and vegetables growing at our feet, but we're hungry. Right? We just need to figure out what a blackberry is, what a blueberry is, what cabbage is. Good. Trying to move through. Stand by. There we go. So we mentioned this a bit about what really is available to us in the total palette of VR services, and what are we really utilizing. And I think this goes to a couple features, right? When we talk about what's necessary, what's appropriate, and what's consistent. Necessary, I feel like you've got a lot of flexibility there. Appropriate, I feel like, again, it's part of that individualized process between counselor and client, that we can justify that, like Jane was talking about, and the comment in the chat, right? Like there's room to justify that and to make everybody feel comfortable with some of those decisions. It's the consistency part that I think can really be a institutional barrier, an agency barrier, to say, hey, Jane, if I bought a $4,000 bike for everybody, we wouldn't have enough money this year. So I'm not gonna be able to buy that bike, I'm sorry. Right, like when we look at the rut, the available, always consistent, necessary, and appropriate things that are utilized often, whether it's part of agency culture at a specific location and those things get utilized all the time, or more broadly, when we look at, cumulative 9/11 data, what are those things that are always utilized? We've got better information on what they cost. It's easier to be consistent. It's easier to know. It's when we really get truly individualized and try and remain consistent that the challenge lies. And I think it really is about creativity there. And, depending on your agency and your state, you may not like the phrase, your agency may not like the phrase blending and braiding of different funding sources and available resources. But that's really where I think you can hit a sweet spot with self-employment, is what really how can we provide the most bang for our buck through VR and what we've got available to us? And how can we fill those gaps with what exists outside that somebody else is footing the bill for, right? Because when you look at it, we've got the support of the Department of Education through vocational rehab, paying for A, B, and C. And then on the other side of that, you've got the US Department of Commerce paying for some technical assistance, possibly like startup grant money and access to affordable credit from US Department of Commerce. And then you've got the US Treasury funding yet again, like more development services, checking accounts, loans, and one-on-one follow along services, right? And so how can we think of it like that? Like our palette of VR services we've got and we sort of are familiar with, even if it's a smaller group than the whole. But how can we add more colors to our palette from local mission-driven organizations that are supporting entrepreneurs, that are also looking at intersectional populations? I mean, that's a big drive of that CDFI, just like this group. People with disabilities who are also in low-income census tracts, right? People with disabilities who are also part of a disadvantaged social group. Lots of the same work, lots of the same conversations. What I like to say is like, the sentences are the same, right? The sentences in the self-employment breakdown that California presented, the sentences that were in the comments and feedback from previous events that y'all said you wanted to learn more about, these are the same sentences that are being said by financial institutions supporting this population. They have different words in the middle, but they're the same sentences, right? They're using their different acronyms, their different specialized lingo, but really the goals and the syntax there is the same. And I really want to help support however I can, bringing like those two, I think, workflows together a little better. And that's a lot. That's nationally, that's at the state side, and it's front line. Like where I don't have fear there is seeing that coming out of Promise, where I saw that happen, like at the federal level, unprecedented cooperation and support to make something like that happen. At the state level, surprisingly, although with some like hiccups and like trying to work together from state agencies, it happened. And then at the local level, we had these integrated resource teams. Like I do see it's possible. What we lack at the moment for this particular issue is, you know, $265 million to get it done. that certainly made it a little easier with Promise. And that's a big ask right now. So another point when we think about, one thing I was thinking about when I was thinking about self-employment setting versus a supported employment setting was thinking about like how self-employment internally, this sort of instinctual reaction is that you're somehow on your own, right? This old, kind of tired Horatio Algier story about how you did it yourself. Nobody else helped you get to where you are. You built this thing from scratch and it's all yours and nobody else is supporting you in that, or nobody else can take credit in that. And that's just not true, right? It's never been true, but it's important for us to think about when we think about the setting and if it's appropriate and what we need to make it successful, how many other people really are involved, right? Many of you have mentioned the small business consultants that you work with. And again, you know, when we talk about monitoring through closure, what we do at Forge is when we close a loan, that's the beginning, right? We help people get ready for the loan. So that's before the beginning. That's the exposition. That's the forward. Then we close our loan and then we go chapter by chapter with them throughout the process. Most of our time, most of our one-on-one time happens in that first 12 months. So if we're working with the right resource partner, monitoring through closure, how can they help us meet the same goals? Are they aware of what we're thinking of as successful versus what they're thinking of as successful? Like they may be trying to limit the liabilities of the corporation or sole proprietorship to be successful. When in fact, like where our goals are, we need to make sure above all else, we've got a meaningful living wage happening, right? And all the bills are being paid. You know, whatever those closure requirements are, 12 months from now, here's our goal. Well, if they're on the same boat, every touch point there, whether it's coming from VR, whether it's coming from an SBA microloan intermediary, whether it's coming from, you know, a mission-based lender, they really can support one another and require a lot less intensive, laborious work on the part of VR, because we're sharing some of that load to keep everybody on track. And some of those things that were required, again, in terms of monitoring, like clients were expected to report their monthly expenses and income back to VR. And that's part of our monitoring for success. Is everybody really trained to interpret those? Right? Because I tell you, I run a small business. I run a not-for-profit. We have 7 people. I have an accountant to do that for me. Right? That's why we have an accountant. I do not feel alone in assessing the financial strength and sustainability of my organization, because it's built in. We say we need an accountant for that. That's what they do. And that can be part of this business plan. Self-employment does not mean you are a marketer, an accountant, a lawyer, and a delivery driver, right? What it means is you are interdependent on a number of members of your community to be successful, which is no different than supported employment, in my opinion. Like, flip that script a bit. Supported self-employment is not unsupported. It's incredibly supported. Right? And there's also nothing that says in a self-employment setting, some of the traditional supports we utilize in supported employment cannot be utilized. Right? We certainly have the same constraints. We certainly have the same goals and targets in terms of necessary, appropriate, consistent. But as we identify needed services and supports and resources, a lot of those that we are familiar with, that we are confident, can translate very easily to self-employment setting. And then outside of that, as we make a budget, as we look over that business plan, has the client sufficiently budgeted for and planned for things like accounting? LaPearl, you mentioned tax liability. Have they planned for that? Is there room in that budget to pay someone to do their taxes or ongoing accounting if that's needed? If they're a whiz at QuickBooks and that's their game, that may not be where they need the support. Right? It may be in the legal formation of how to do things, paperwork or agreements with clients. This has come up from y'all organically, which I'm excited about. I think everybody recognizes this issue. I highlighted it several times throughout the presentation, but we don't know what we don't know. If I didn't know I was doing that wrong, or I didn't know that was available to me as an option, it's not gonna be there. And I like that somebody pointed out, if we build a library of success stories, or sharing those success stories in some way, that they include both the client side and how the experience was for them and what they found through it, but also from the counselor side, right? What did we experience in trying to make this happen? How did we do it? What did we learn? What can we learn from unsuccessful experiences? What can we learn from successful ones? Is there agency pressure about closure when related to self-employment, or is it, I'll leave it there, question mark. Is there agency pressure regarding closure for self-employment? Didn't hear anybody there or see anything in the chat. Is there agency pressure regarding spending for unemployment? I've heard that it's viewed as more intensive, which is a labor cost, but not necessarily a cost for services. Is it viewed as more expensive to counselors or to supervisors? Good. Okay. Because one,
Just had one response from Martin. It says
Not
not sure.
yeah, good. Here we go. Yeah. Yeah, good. Under WIOA, focus has become more on quality as opposed to just getting a job to get the closure. Thank you. Thank you, LaPro. And I think it's great. I mean, the changes certainly were received under WIOA in Arkansas as moving in that direction, with that change of focus on outcomes and quality versus quantity. Where I still saw like something that was problematic for me is a client would have a different experience obtaining service depending on the time of year their particular plan was developed, right? And so, and Jane, I'm gonna use it because it's a big, bright, colored bicycle. It's a great image. You know, a $4,000 bike in October at the beginning of the budget cycle, may be received one way. Yes, we got plenty of money, it's brand new, or no, we can't do that for 12 months. So, you know, for every client we plan to serve this year, we're not gonna be able to do that. That's too much. Versus coming up on September and the end of the budget cycle, I saw two responses. One, we don't have the money for that. We're out of money for that. Versus two, yeah, can you buy them 2 bicycles? Because if we don't spend that money, they're not going to give it to us in the future. Those are the two responses you might get. We have to spend the money that we've got so that we can keep getting this amount of money in the future. And that's, I think, the problem. Like with that consistency is if it's truly individualized, how can we make it more consistent while being truly individualized to each client? And I think that speaks to that, right? Like the spending side and the budget cycle side, our rehab agency was like, depending on the time of year, you either need to get the money out or you are fearful to spend a penny. And it's cyclical and it's not great, especially across the board, not just for VR services, states across the country don't spend their match. They don't put up the money in their budget in the state to really match and take advantage fully of the federal VR money that's on the table. That's how Promise came about. It was turnback funds that the states didn't spend that were appropriated federally. So trying to find a way to do that better, I think, more consistently. Good. This is a good comment, Martin. Martin's talking about self-employment and secondary effects, right? Mentions work readiness skills, becoming a better employee, know that I'm appreciated as an employee after you had an experience as an entrepreneur, learn more about the challenges of getting customers. For sure, right? The context of being the boss in that way, I think is an exceptional learning experience. And the idea that somebody could be self-employed and then affirmatively say, it's not for me, right? I would love to go back and be someone's employee and let the boss do all those boss things. But I think a fantastic highlighting of those secondary effects, whether they become a better self-employed individual on their own, or whether they become, again, employed in another setting and are better for it. Thank you, Mark. Pamela sort of reaffirming the budget look. Yeah. Depending on the budget cycle. I just like that. I just like that very much, but I don't have a good solution there. I really don't. But it's something that's always been on my mind since working in the VR system through Promise. And again, I think the challenges in self-employment are just heightened by that budget cycle. meaning that like every service that we might plan for in a plan is certainly put under stress through the budget cycle. But because we feel less confident about self-employment and the services and resources needed to be successful, again, it's even more fearful. It's even more unknown. We have even less understanding if there's budget pressure involved. Good. So another concern is insurance, LaPearl. So many of our participants need insurance coverage, which is harder under self-employment. I think that's true. And I think that, again, to get the insurance for a self-employed individual, there are some barriers there, A, with the type of business that's set up, and B, I think just enrolling the right professionals to help us get it set up. I did notice California's presentation mentioned that the self-employed setting needed to be a sole proprietorship. And Cynthia, Ismail, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the case. And that one there, to LaPearl's point, I think does hinder that. I think insurance is a lot easier for a limited liability company or an incorporated company of some kind than it is for a sole proprietorship. But all the business insurance on my end, for both self-employed settings that I've had and now like this not-for-profit setting, all of our insurance paperwork has no information requesting any information about disability. So I hope that that's not playing a role in any way, because the insurance company doesn't use that data to make a determination. They tend to use a lot of information, but to my knowledge, that wasn't one of them. So I want to be sure, LaPearl, that we can help support all the counselors frontline to say, why is it harder and how can we overcome that barrier to make it seem like just another service or resource that we get set up and lined up. I mentioned this earlier, but I want everybody to think about this. So the goal in terms of success, how we deem a success in a self-employment setting, so they make at least at minimum wage after 12 months. And Forge currently has 341 borrowers. So that's 341 small businesses in our portfolio of loans. And when they start, when we close on their loan, over a third of those individuals had another job. Their small business did not produce enough income to support their own wages. Certainly not in the first year. And in fact, we encourage people to have an outside source of income when starting a small business. If more than one person is involved, be it husband and wife, family members, best friends, whatever it is, many times one of them will keep an outside job until they feel comfortable. I like to encourage people in our world, I like to encourage people to think of yourself as the second employee rather than the first employee. So you keep your job, get this thing going. And when it's time to grow, rather than hiring somebody else, you become that second hire. When you're confident, you can really dedicate yourself, but you've already proven it out that it can support one person. So even if you want to get rid of them and become that first person, you've got that option, but think of yourself as a second employee. And so is that realistic? I think, are we putting more of a burden on counselors, clients, and the small business consultants in this triad of people than the typical population has outside of VR? Even accessing another federal program. It's different. The collateral requirements we put on people for lending, or what kind of personal investment they need to have, or outside investment they need to have, what kind of credit they need to have, right? Like a lot of those are going to be part of the soft underwriting that VR and the small business consultant are doing. But then we also have this sort of what things have to look like at 12 months for us to call it a success. And again, I think from an agency perspective and a federal services perspective, success is one thing. From a client's trajectory in their sort of independent living, success is completely different. Like Martin's example, somebody going from self-employment, changing their mind and going back to employment successfully. That self-employment setting might not be a success, but it certainly was for that client. Clicking through, sorry. Good. So mentioned a few of these things coming through, but I really like the model to get VR and these other agencies connected through mission-driven lenders, the community development financial institutions that are serving people with disabilities, and specifically have federal support to serve people with disabilities, and to really look sort of side by side. We did a comparison looking at IEPs, IPEs, there were a couple other acronyms in there, but across Social Security, VR, Department of Workforce Services, how are all these individualized plans the same and how they're different? How could we get them a little bit more in line to keep people from going through this over and over and over again? I think there's a great opportunity to do that here. And from the CDFI side, I think there's the opportunity to do it again nationally. At the state level, there wouldn't be a state CDFI organization, but there will be a number of CDFIs in the state who would want to participate that could work through and with a state VR agency. But most importantly, and I think most meaningfully in terms of change, is those frontline relationships. Whether that's a lunch hosting on this topic, like locally, we've got our local VR counselors and the local CDFI technical assistance providers getting together to lunch to talk about a specific issue, right? Teach us about business plans, teach us about how to go through this business plan thing. And then on the next week, it's like, okay, VR folks, teach us about what you do. We have no idea what you do. We know it's about people with disabilities, but we don't know much more. Can you help us learn? I really see that as being the most meaningful way to change. And that would be ground up. And I think, from transition, Jane, I know you're from Oregon. I think a lot of the successful data that Promise was built upon came from Oregon's previous demonstrations with transition age youth. And so that grassroots change really filtered up and became, national model demonstration project with a 15-year evaluation behind it. So. Again, I think one thing to demystify the self-employment is how can we frame it more like how we already deal with supported employment and competitive integrated employment? How can we look at it like self-employment, like job carving, right? This is something I do with business owners. Somebody mentioned I have an idea, which they were right to say not all ideas should be businesses, but when somebody comes to Forge and is talking about opening something, to really talk to them about the chores, right? Yes, you may like making pies, but when you look at the chores of what it means to run a business that makes pies, you're going to be making pies every day, probably until you want to close the business. You're going to be making pies, but that's not the only thing you'll be doing. And so what are the other things that you're going to be doing? And do you like those chores? It's probably what's kept me from opening a restaurant. I love being in a restaurant. I love working in a restaurant. But when I think about the daily chores of running a restaurant, I don't want to do it anymore. The things that are going to happen every day, no matter what, I don't want to do it anymore. Really, I want to make sure to highlight a couple things on this last slide. There's a national support network of small business and development centers. And these may be part of your business consultant resource networks that you already utilize. But if they're not, know that they can be used in conjunction with VR services or as a separate pathway to opening a small business. And their services are free. They have grant funding federally to provide these. They're community navigator programs through the Small Business Administration. Likewise, the community development finance institutions, the link I provided is specifically to a consortium of disability-focused CDFIs around the country. And they provide those development services. And again, they can be integrated in that process as the small business consultant supporting the VR process, or they can be utilized outside of that. And I want to highlight that for a couple of reasons. When we look at the organic rate of people with disabilities in a self-employed setting outside of VR, it's higher. So if people not necessarily don't qualify for VR services, likewise, I think we could help support self-employment as a goal, whether or not people are in the VR system or eligible for the VR system. And hopefully I've left some time for a few questions or trampolines to what's next for this group or outside.
You have. Thank you, Philip. Any questions or comments from participants? You're welcome to provide those now. We've had some good discussion today, good input. Thank you, Philip, for giving us this information and leading us in this discussion about self-employment. You sure there are no final comments or questions? Something else you want to explore that's on your mind? Not hearing any. Oh, Pam, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say that I thank Philip for making a comment about it being an experience for our clients, because I think that's important. I never thought about that. Yes, it may not last, but it's an experience, and jobs don't last. There is a revolving door with some of our customers, so it doesn't work. So why would we think that everybody we put in self-employment, it has to work for 10 to 20 years? It's an experience, and I thank him for that.
Yeah, you're welcome, Pam. And I building on that, like, if we truly want a more equitable and accessible experience of life, risk is part of that, and risk taking is a part of that, right? And how we support people to take more risks outside of the working environment in terms of their living environment, we need to do so as well in their professional world. And that's what this is, risk taking. And we think of it as more risky than just getting a job. But I don't think it has to be. We just need to be more informed about what it looks and feels like.
Yeah, and how do those stories of success, how we get away from looking at the big people, the Oprahs and the Elon Musks, and start looking at those small business, the real mom and pops who are making it, who are on their second or third or fourth or fifth, sixth or seventh business that is finally succeeding. And how do we build the confidence in our staff so that we are feel that we're able to take those risks ourselves? I think part of the issue is that we see it as more of a risk than perhaps the consumer does. So what do we need to do as VR professionals to help build our own level of confidence?
Mm-hmm.
So to that point, are you available for additional questions, technical assistance offline, Philip?
Me? Yes, please. I've enjoyed hearing from everybody who chimed in and typed in, and I am available completely.
Your contact information, is that on the PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's the last slide. Email's probably best, but my mobile's on there as well. If you want to give me a call, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you.
Happy to talk more. Yeah. And I did want to say, Robin, too, that in some of the data I was looking through, Mississippi might be a good agency to tap to talk more about self-employment if anybody wants to talk more about self-employment. Whereas nationally, historically, we're hovering 1% to 2% self-employment closures. They were up around 12% self-employment closures. So they were actually exceeding the organic average of the typical population, and the only state doing so.
Well, Peggy will be happy to hear that. I don't know if she's still on. That's where she was a VR counselor. So
That's where I had several of my experiences working with self-employment.
you laid a good foundation while you were there. So
No,
kudos.
I think that wasn't me. I'm glad that they're doing well. That's great.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear. So certainly being able to share more of those success stories, I think is important to our work so that we know we don't have to reinvent the wheel, that we can build upon the successes that are happening in the other states. So if you have those, thank you to Jane and others who have shared. Please forward those, and we'd be happy to get them out to our network of participants in Project E3. Again, thank you, Philip. I'm going to stop share. Thank you to everyone who participated today in the Project E3 Leadership Academy. We do have one more meeting coming up, and I will share the date for that. That will be May the 20th. And so we're looking at continuing our discussion about business and what employment looks like for individuals with disabilities, especially when we're talking about this new virtual environment and how people are going back to work, what businesses are providing. I'm sorry, LaPro, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I just have a question. Will we be able to get a copy of Philip's presentation from today?
Yes, thank you for sending me your email address. I'll get that to you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Anyone else? All righty. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.